Welcome to the Legacy Project. I am so excited that you've joined us. You know, there's so much material on the Legacy Project. There's all kinds of messages, from attitudes to the book of Revelation to the three feasts to offering, all kinds of things. And I know that as you study the Word of God and learn and listen, you're going to grow in faith, you're going to grow in your Christ-like attitude. So thank you for joining us on the Legacy Project. I know it will bless your life. It's been a real joy and a real honor and a privilege to be able to do this material for you. Welcome to the Legacy Project. So glad you joined with us today. I'm so excited about this particular subject. I'm going to be talking about the Roman Empire. And I'd like to ask you a question just by the way of opening it up. Even though you know the answer, I think it's still worth asking. And what do you think? I mean, who do you think would survive the centuries? Which one do you think would be greater? Think about, just for a moment, go back 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire, one of the most powerful empires on the face of the planet, with all its wealth, we've seen the movies, all its power, all its might, all its soldiers, thousands of chariots, there's countless swords, a vast empire. And the ruler, of course, Julius Caesar, was hailed as God. You got to remember, even to be a Roman citizen was like a really highly prized status. Would they survive the centuries? Would they survive with kingdoms coming and kingdoms going? Or the alternative is 12 or 11, I should say, 11 men who just lost their leader. 11 men, 3 of them were fishermen, one was a tax collector, one was a physician, one even was a doubter. The leader, we know, of course, was a carpenter from a small, insignificant town called Nazareth. And the quote of the day was, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" He had led this bunch for 3.5 years. And then you know the story. He was brutally strung upon a cross. He was tortured. And that same Roman Empire that I mentioned, by the way, they were the ones that crucified him at the request of the Pharisees and so forth. This carpenter never took up a sword against him. He never raised an army against him. In fact, he washed his disciples' feet, and he said, if somebody asks you to go 1 mile, go with them 2, referring to the Roman soldier carrying the pack of a Roman soldier. A Jewish boy had to carry it 1 mile, and then Jesus said, go with them 2. This was the one who said, I've come to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. I mean, he is one who said, if you want to be great, become a servant, which was looked down upon in the Roman Empire. I recall, of course, a great guy in the Bible, and I'll be doing a legacy project about him, about Obed-Edom. I mean, he was just such a wonderful servant and loved the presence of God, loved the house of God, and of course got greatly blessed by doing that. And so if you lived 2,000 years ago, if you were part of, you know, the Israel then or the Roman Empire, if you were a gambling person, who would you put your money on to survive? The Roman Empire or this 11 disciples, 11 mixed bag of people? So much so that 2,000 years later around the world, in the furthest country from Jerusalem in New Zealand, on this day, people are still talking about one of these things. And I'm sure you know which one, of course. But not too many people back then would bet, of course, on this carpenter, on this servant that gave his life and got crucified. Yet, of course, we know the Roman Empire has come and gone, but the carpenter, Jesus, lives on. Now, I don't know about you, but that right there has to be a miracle, has to be absolutely supernatural, absolutely amazing. No two ways about it. And let's have something else to think about. Think about this for a moment. This carpenter, born in Bethlehem, born in the nation of Israel, born under the ruling invading regime of the Roman Empire, and the map which shows you just how vast the Roman Empire was at the time, and they were considered to rule the whole world of the known world at that time. The Roman Empire who conquered the world as well. It was huge in that day, and even today, of course, in history, the Roman Empire stands as one of the greatest empires of all time. And so these days, to give you something else to think about, they were very barbaric days, very hard days. They were cruel days. I mean, even at Christ's birth, you see the extent of that brutality. The Roman soldiers murdered all the babies under the age of 2 in the hometown of Bethlehem. And, at his birth town. And of course, the brutality is even seen in his death, the floggings, the beatings, the crown of thorns, the purple robe, the nails, and so forth. And just the brutality that was back in those days to survive was incredible. Let's have a look at a clip of Jesus going to the cross. The Bible records that the disciples stood afar off at this time. They didn't want to know. They didn't want to be seen to be associating with this one that was strung up there. They didn't want to be strung up there. And you can't blame them, right? They went into hiding. They were totally afraid. And who could blame them? It's amazing, really, to be honest, that woman stood near her. And women, let's be honest, they were the first ones to see the risen Jesus. And sometimes women are braver than men. The men went into hiding, but here's a woman. They stood and watched him on the cross. And these men, they'd heard all the messages. They heard the messages of Jesus saying, like, turn the other cheek, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, do good to those who hate you. Do not fear the one who can kill the body, but fear him who can kill both the body and the soul and spirit. Be of good cheer, he said, I have overcome. He said also, do not fear, but go into all the world and preach the gospel, making disciples of all nations. And so, standing afar off when Jesus was being strung up, the promises of God to these disciples seemed to be way out of reach, seemed to be impossible. It was like the Roman army was in control. But here's my point, and this is such a great point, and we need to learn how this happened. In 300 years, not 3,000 years, but 300 years, not 3,000, Rome in 300 AD declared Christianity as a state religion. I mean, talk about changing a city, changing a nation, changing the world in 300 years. These 11 guys, at that time, 300 AD was under the leadership of the empire, Constantine the Great. But he embraced Christianity and the face of the world changed. And can I say, in the face of atheism today, in the face of every other false religion, can I say in the face of today's modern society, when Christianity was embraced, the world changed for the better. Hospitals, universities, everything good came out of Christianity. I'm not saying it's been perfect, but I'm saying it brought blessing to nations. Every nation that embraced Christianity, like known as the Western nations today, prospered, where other nations known as Eastern nations who did not. Now, let's be honest also, Christianity is not a Western religion. They just embraced Christianity. Christianity came out of the East. It's not a white man's religion. Jesus was brown, obviously. He was a Jew, Israel. He wasn't black, he wasn't white, but he definitely wasn't a white European guy. And so Christianity sometimes can be seen to be that, and it's not. So nations that embraced Christianity flourished and led the world. And there is no record of Jesus ever coming into contact with someone and their life got worse. Not even dead people. Everybody Jesus touched, their life improved. 300 years. Interesting enough, there is an account in Acts 18 verse 2 where Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Think about this. In Acts 18:2, Claudius commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Little did he know that the Jewish carpenter would change the face of Rome forever. I think that's quite amazing. That in 300 years, Christianity would be embraced as a Roman state religion. Now remember, please, how hard and how ungodly the Roman Empire was at this time. They were worshiping false gods. They weren't worshiping Jehovah or Yahweh like Israel. These were barbaric days. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the movies like Gladiator, Spartacus. I mean, they were pretty tough days, brutal days. And yet in 300 years, 12 men, and of course those wonderful women, changed the world. It's important to note that during these 300 years, that Christians were also persecuted and killed. Many of them were crucified. Caesars back then in Roman time were treated like gods, and they reigned on the earth. Men like Nero. Nero, he reigned between AD 54 and 68. He was the greatest tyrant of them all. They say he was a bit of a madman. Here's the one who burnt down Rome and blamed the Christians for it. He killed all his family. He was so jealous, and he would dip Christians in wax and light them down his driveway for candles when he had a party. He was such a cruel person. He would bury Christians up to their neck on these. I've been to Maximilian Mile, where they would race chariots around this big circuit, and he would bury Christians up their necks, and the chariots would come around and slice their heads off. Philippians 4:22, Nero, and he was the last of the Caesars, and people thought he was the Antichrist, and he certainly was Antichrist, no two ways about that. He is also, and of course Titus came in and leveled Jerusalem in AD 70, but thousands of Jews and Christians lost their lives in horrendous ways under Nero's regime, and other Caesars as well. He was the one that both Peter and Paul stood before and were condemned to death. And yet Paul wrote to the church to pray and to obey and to honor those in authority. Pretty amazing when you think about it. But the Romans who tortured Christians, they were fed to the lions. I've been to the Colosseum in Rome. It's just such a spellbound place. You can feel the atmosphere there. And again, we've seen the movies, and I know the Christians weren't the only ones that were persecuted, but no two ways about it. Christians were totally persecuted. They were put in the gladiator Colosseums, and as I said, the one in Rome is one of the most famous, but there's other Colosseums around used for sports, martyrdom, and all that kind of stuff, blood sports. And now, please, I'm not here to decry Rome. I've been to Rome. I've preached in Rome before. It's a great country, and I'm not here to decry. I'm just trying to paint a picture of what life was like back then and how Christianity evolved. And it might pay to give a thought also that these were not the days, obviously, of the internet, of Twitter, of cell phones, of Facebook. They didn't even have television, you know that. They had no airplanes or cars to get around in. They had no modern and yet these 12 disciples in 300 years changed the Roman Empire from a pagan civilization to one that embraced Christianity. This whole series is how did they do that? How did they do that? I've just tried to paint a picture of what an amazing miracle that is. What an amazing miracle that is. And so I'm going to go through 7 reasons on how the early church changed the world. We'll be picking it up in the next segment of this legacy on the Roman Empire.